starting with your education, we know that you have an MA in Russian and East European Area Studies and a PhD in Slavic literature. Do you think this diverse education has shaped or even influenced your writing or study in any way?
Probably not area studies, because you learn about social structure and economy and all the boring stuff, or the stuff that could land you a job. During my doctoral studies at IU, I learned how to write through studying other authors and studying literary theory. I didn't know what I was studying back then. I didn't know what I was doing, but yeah, it helped a lot.
You wrote in Curse Bunny, if I could make a wish, I want to be a little happier. If I became too happy, I will miss sadness.
That's a real song.
Oh, it's a part of the song?
It's a German song. I wrote that in the story that Marlene Dietrich sang during the Second World War, the German actress. Sang it in 1941 or 44, I can't really remember, but it's part of a song, and I Google translated the original from German. Oh. So that's my translation via Google.
So I was wondering, just like from this quote that you added, this is kind of a philosophical question, but how would you define in this way happiness in your words?
In my words. First of all, the characters are not really happy, so they don't know what happiness is. But that's kind of, as you said, philosophical. That's part of the human condition. We cannot stay happy all the time. We can be healthy and reasonably content. If you have enough sleep, we do, and if you have enough sleep, food, water, and rest, then you can be reasonably happy and lead a creative, healthy life. But being happy all the time is just not. It's just not reachable, and it's not sustainable. You will be hungry at some point. Something will upset you, like the weather. The world is changing, and human beings, we change and we adapt to our circumstances every single moment of our lives. So we will never be perfectly happy and stay that way. It's just not us as human beings. And when trauma happens, like war or natural disaster, then it's really hard to find happiness. There will be fleeting moments of joy or hope, but in those circumstances, the trauma lasts longer than you think. When the disaster is over, you will have the memory, and you will go back to that moment and make sure that you're alive, and that kind of takes up a lot of energy and leaves very little for you to be happy with.
So just on the topic of like happiness, would you say that you're incorporating your own personal emotions or struggles growing up in such stories in Curse Bunny?
Yeah, the moral of the story is do not go to grad school. But in reunion, specifically in reunion, I wanted to talk about generational trauma, the collective memory of a traumatic historical event, and how that influences and affects or impacts the later generations. Because my grandparents thought they survived the war, but the memory of the trauma lived with them and were passed down through their sons and daughters and to me, to their granddaughter. And a lot of younger people whose grandparents weren't even born at that time will still have that collective memory through their grandparents' parents and their parents. So it goes on, and it reiterates, the memories reiterate themselves through history, through human experiences. And I wanted to talk about that, not exactly my personal trauma, but that on a greater scale.
So in a way, your cultural heritage and identity shaped your writing, would you say?
My father's side comes from the north, and my grandmother never lost her accent. Like, until her dying day, she had that very northern accent, which is different from the current North Korean accent because they focused everything in Pyongyang. So the Pyongyang accent is the standard accent, and my grandmother comes from the northern peak of the northern end before the separation of North Korea and South Korea. So it was just one Korea. She just had that original northern accent, which was very rare, and I should have learned it. I regret it. She passed away a long time ago, so that's a loss as I feel it. My identity is South Korean. I was born and raised in Seoul. So with my peers, having that heritage that somebody speaks with a very distinct northern accent, who remembers what it was like before the separation, before North Korea, what it was like just living in Korea, that was very rare, and I think it's worth preserving. I have my cousins who remember her, and I want to remember her in my own way.
While reading Kurspani, there are definitely moments where I was thinking, oh, how could she have thought of like these interesting topics such as like poop, incorporating poop for a frozen finger. So I was just curious about how you start your brainstorming process, or even decide on the topics of your stories.
First I come up with the ending.
Oh,
So,
really?
yeah. When I write a short story, I decide on the ending, and it has to be like it has to be the part where it packs a punch. That's the climax. That's the most important part. And then I go to the beginning, which is the hook, the reader. If I have the ending, the beginning, the title, then I pretty much start writing and fill out the gaps. And if I'm lucky, the story will write itself. If I'm not, then I'll have to do some research or do the dishes or do the laundry, agonize.
I think that can explain why like, every single story I read, there was definitely like this like climax point where I never expected that would happen. So
There's a Russian literary theorist, Tomaszewski, I think. He wrote in 1927 or something, so it's before me. It's something I learned in grad school. He said short stories are like going up a hill. If you go to the top, the scenery has to be very different from where you started. If it's the same, then it's not a story.
thank you so much.